लिखो तो हाँ
ऐसे नहीं पूछ रहा
दोनों साइड आगे बढ़ जाओ यहाँ एंट्रेंस नहीं है बंद Friends, we only have to wait for the disappearance of the photographers. May I request? May I request? Please. Please, please. Friends, we only have to wait for the disappearance of the photographers. May I request? May I request? Please. Please, please. I now call the meeting to order. Professor Anjan Mukherjee of the Jawaharlal University to be presiding over the function. I now request Dr. Shaibal Gupta to make the introductory remarks.
Chairman, Professor Anjan Mukherjee sir, Professor Sen, Honorable Chief Minister of Bihar, Shri Nitish Kumar ji, Honorable Deputy Chief Minister of Bihar, Shri Sushil Kumar Modi ji, Professor Ghosh, Naveen Kumar ji, Shri Kumar Rana, one of the greatest scholars of the world and one of the greatest sons of India, Professor Amartya Kumar Sen. We are extremely grateful to him that within his extremely busy schedule to serve some critical professional and social commitments, he has allowed some space for us to be here at Patna and deliver a lecture on a topic that most concerns all of us. I have no doubt that his talk on Bihar, past, present and future will be yet another academic benchmark whose contents will not only be quoted for years, but it will also become a policy guideline for public functionaries and an intellectual framework for researchers and thinking members of the society. Since Professor is a prolific writer on issues that go far beyond the conventional boundaries of economics, many amongst us are reasonably familiar with his writings. But reading his book cannot be a substitute for listening to his speech, more so for us when he is speaking specifically on Bihar. When Ainsina Institute of Social Studies was in full glory in late 60s and early 70s, under the stewardship of late Professor A.K. Dasgupta, Professor Sen had visited Patna several times. But thereafter, for several reasons, for some of which we are collectively responsible, Professor Sen's visit to Patna got discontinued. It's a matter of ecstasy and privilege for us that with the resurgence of the state, under the leadership of Sri Nitish Kumar ji, Professor Sen is visiting the state once again. Professor Sen had once characterized our nation as a dialogic society. In that context, Bihar was the epicenter of global scholarship once upon a time. However, the profile of the state changed thereafter over the centuries. There is obviously a historical disjunct and a lack of continuum with the past now. It will be preposterous for me to introduce Bihar to you, sir. You are already aware of its rich historical past. The efforts of the Nalanda group for resurrection of the glory of the ancient university in the state under your chairmanship indicates your deep social that with the revived Nalanda University, it will trigger renaissance and cultural regeneration in Bihar, where success in competitive examination in what counts most. We are happy to inform you that our state, after years of stagnation, is on the revival track, while social cataclysm was followed by democratization of the political process. There was near collapse of the state structure, with the development agenda being a clear victory. Unfortunately, being an old Jamindari settlement, the quality of governance in the state was poor, both in pre and post-independent Bihar. We did not have a viable, functioning state. In the last 3 years, therefore, one of the most important agenda of Nitish Kumar was to establish the non-existing authority of the state. He knew very well that a well-oiled state machinery will be the ultimate instrument for ensuring development as well as social justice. He has been successful in his mission to a great measure. The full resurrection of the state is yet to be complete, but the resonance of its functioning is being felt in the entire length and breadth of the Bihar. However, building the state structure is not a one-shot affair. Further, whereas building the state structure is not an easy proposition, creation of a bridge between it and the people is even more challenging task. The Vikas Yatra development tour of rural area launched by him is essentially aimed to take stock of the state building effort and its actual impact at the grassroots level. This march is not only an attempt for concurrent evaluation, it will also hope fully followed by missed course corrections wherever necessary during the remaining part of its tenure. Fortunately, in the last 3 years, the massive structure of the state is either being built afresh or being restored comprehensively. Our Chief Minister is making best of his effort toward this goal, and feeling of hope has reappeared in Bihar, replacing the sense of gloom that used to characterize it before. We are fortunate that Sri Sushil Kumar Modi, our respected Deputy Chief Minister, is there to lend an extremely able hand to our Chief Minister, and the two together pursuing an ambitious development path for Bihar. We are grateful that both of them are here to honor Professor Sen and listen to his lecture. We all know that development is not possible unless it becomes a collective goal of the society, encompassing both individuals and institutions. It was against this need of development that about 1.5 decades back, we had started the Asian Development Research Institute. Our aim is not just academic research, but such research that can strengthen the process of development to deeper understanding of the issues and identifying the practical solutions to them. I do not know how successful we have been, but our efforts have always been sincere. Our co-host for this lecture, the Prachiti Trust, has a similar agenda. They have been active mostly in West Bengal and Jharkhand, and I also learned that they are likely to add Bihar to their focus. After I finish, Sri Kumar Rana, a senior functionary of the trust, will present before you a brief profile of Prachiti Trust. As you all know, that Professor Sen is the chairman of the trust. Friends, we have amongst us this afternoon Professor Anjan Mukherjee of the Jawaharlal Nehru University. I am very grateful to him that he has kindly agreed to preside over this occasion. In fact, in the recent past, he has been increased his involvement with Bihar, and in particular, he is now associated with ADRI as the chairperson of Academic Committee of Center for Economic Policy and Public Finance, a center supported by Government of Bihar and hosted by ADRI. We are also happy that amongst us this afternoon we have Sri Naveen Kumarji. Sri Kumar shoulders the huge responsibility of managing the state finance, As the Principal Secretary of the Finance Department, he is also the source of support for R3 and the chairperson of the Center for Economic Policy and Public Finance. It is my pleasure to welcome him to on this occasion. Thank you, sir.
I request Mr. Kumar Rana to make his presentation.
नमस्ते। समय बचाने के लिए मैं सभी को एक साथ, बुरा नहीं मानिएगा, एक साथ सभी को धन्यवाद स्वागत करता हूं, इसलिए कि यहाँ बहुत ज़्यादा बात करने का समय नहीं है। जो काम के लिए आप लोग आए हैं, इसके इंतज़ार है, हम लोग उसको शुरू कर देना चाहिए। प्रतिष्ठित राष्ट्र के बारे में 2-4 बातें बोलना चाहिए। ये 1999 में प्रोफेसर अमर्त्य सेन इसको फाउंड किए थे। 2001 साल से प्रतिष्ठित राष्ट्र बंगाल में और कुछ हद तक झारखंड में पहले शुरुआत के तौर पर कुछ शोध कार्य से शुरू किया। प्राइमरी एजुकेशन, बेसिक हेल्थ, जेंडर इक्वलिटी, ये तीनों रहा हमारा फोकस। आज तक 2001 से लेकर 2009 तक प्रतिष्ठित ट्रस्ट का रिसर्च टीम 9 स्टडीज पब्लिश कर चुके हैं। ये सब में है 6 है प्राइमरी एजुकेशन के ऊपर, 1 है हेल्थ के ऊपर, ये वेस्ट बंगाल में, और 1 है एजुकेशन के ऊपर झारखंड में, 1 है हेल्थ के ऊपर झारखंड में। एक और स्टडी निकलने वाली है, दी प्रतिष्ठित चाइल्ड रिपोर्ट, ये 25 तारीख को निकलेगी। इसके अलावा, ये रिसर्च के अलावा हमारा जो काम है, जैसे कि सहवालदा कह रहे थे कि एकेडमिक रिसर्च ही काफ़ी नहीं है, इसके साथ साथ इसको एक्शन में लाना भी जरूरी है। तो अंडर द गाइडेंस ऑफ प्रोफेसर अमर्त्य सेन हम लोग इस रिसर्च वर्क के साथ साथ हम लोग इसको पब्लिश करते हैं वर्नाकुलर में। जहाँ झारखंड की सवाल है वो संताली में हम लोग पब्लिश किए हैं, जहाँ बंगाल का सवाल है वो बांग्ला में पब्लिश किए हैं, एंड ऑल्सो इन इंग्लिश। इसके साथ हम लोग आज तक 14 पब्लिक डिस्कशन मीन्स पेरेंट्स, टीचर्स एंड अदर्स, उन्होंने उनके साथ ऑन द इशूज ऑफ प्राइमरी एजुकेशन, बेसिक हेल्थ एंड जेंडर इक्वलिटी, इम्प्लीमेंटेशन ऑफ मिड डे मील, ये इशूज पर हम बातचीत करते हैं। और मेन फोकस ये रहता है कि गांव के लोग, गांव के प्राइमरी टीचर्स, गांव के पेरेंट्स वो बोलें और हमारे पॉलिसी लेवल के लोग उसको सुने। ये आज तक हम लोग 14 वर्कशॉप इस तरफ से कर चुके हैं। इसके बाद हमारा और एक फोकस है कि टीचर्स यूनियन के साथ, तो ये भी प्रोफेसर अमर्त्य सेन का ये श्रेय जाता है कि जिस समय सभी लोग टीचर्स यूनियन को ही आरोप लगा रहे थे कि सारे कुछ जितना भी हमारे एबिल्स हैं सबके लिए टीचर्स यूनियन ही जिम्मेदार है, उस समय हम लोग टीचर्स यूनियन के साथ काम किए। और आज ये सारे का नतीजा एक रिसर्च का नहीं, उसके साथ जुड़ा हुआ पब्लिक डिस्कशन एंड पब्लिक डिसेमिनेशन, उसके साथ जुड़ा हुआ कि यूनियन के साथ काम करना, आज नतीजा है कि बंगाल में हम लोग कुछ अच्छा रिजल्ट देख रहे हैं, बहुत ही अच्छा कुछ रिजल्ट। कुछ सेक्टर्स में कुछ पॉलिसी चेंजेस हुआ है, स्कूल रिफॉर्म्स का काम काफ़ी हद तक बढ़ा है। यहाँ स्टैटिस्टिक्स बोलने की जरूरत नहीं है, लेकिन 2001 और 2009 के बीच में काफ़ी फर्क नज़र आने लगा है। तो इसी तरह से हम लोग काम करते हैं। ब्रीफली ये है कि रिसर्च, उसके साथ डिसेमिनेशन, पब्लिक डिस्कशन और उसके साथ कुछ एक्शन विथ डिफरेंट एजेंट्स ऑफ सोसाइटी, हमारा यही मुख्य काम है। और उम्मीद है कि हम लोग बिहार में भी कुछ काम कर पाएंगे विद द हेल्प ऑफ आवर चीफ मिनिस्टर एंड द पीपल ऑफ द स्टेट। थैंक यू वेरी मच।
I now call upon.
I'm really very sorry. My colleague Somi, can you come? We have some of our reports for sitting stand. Somi.
Now, may I request all of you to kindly move.
प्रतीक्षी ट्रस्ट के सचिव श्री कुमार राणा जी, मैं यहाँ आपके और प्रोफेसर अमर्त्य सेन के बीच में विवाद बनने के लिए नहीं आया। मैं भी आपकी तरह उनको सुनने आया, लेकिन बिहार के मुख्यमंत्री के नाते अपनी तरफ से, बिहार सरकार की तरफ से और बिहार के 9 करोड़ लोगों की तरफ से मैं महान अर्थशास्त्री प्रोफेसर अमर्त्य सेन का स्वागत करने के लिए खड़ा हुआ हूं। आज पिछले 2 वर्षों से हम लोग अनवरत प्रयत्नशील थे कि अमर्त्य बाबू बिहार आए। कई बार चर्चा भी होती रही, नालंदा मेंटर ग्रुप के सिलसिले में बातचीत हुई, लेकिन ये पहले समय नहीं निकाल पा रहे थे अपनी व्यस्तताओं के कारण। लेकिन नालंदा मेंटर ग्रुप के चेयरमैन के नाते उसकी बैठक में इन्हें बिहार आना था और इन्होंने कृपा पूर्वक वो कार्यक्रम तय किया और उसके चलते 19 तारीख से आप बिहार में हैं। कल उसके विषय पर, उस विषय पर भी चर्चा हुई और इन्होंने एक प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस के जरिए नालंदा विश्वविद्यालय के लिए क्या कुछ किया जा रहा है इन्होंने बताया भी। और आज इन्होंने यहाँ एक लेक्चर देने के लिए समय निकाला है। ये हम सब लोगों के लिए उत्साह का विषय, हम सब उत्साहित हैं। अब बिहार के अतीत, वर्तमान और भविष्य पर आप अपना संभाषण देंगे और उसमें हम सब लोगों को बहुत कुछ जानने, सोचने, समझने का अवसर मिलेगा। और इनकी बातों पर खुद भी हम सब लोगों को बहुत कुछ सोचने का अवसर मिलेगा। सबसे बड़ी बात है कि अतीत हमारा गौरवशाली, वर्तमान कुछ ठीक ठाक भले ही ना हो, लेकिन मेरा पक्का विश्वास है कि भविष्य जरूर बिहार का उज्जवल है, क्योंकि बिहार का भविष्य अगर उज्जवल नहीं होगा तो देश का भी भविष्य उज्जवल नहीं होगा। और जब अमर्त्य सेन यहाँ पधारे हैं तो हम सब लोग उत्साहित हैं। अमर्त्य सेन क्या है? सबके किसी चीज के बारे में अपना नजरिया है, मेरा भी अपना एक नजरिया है। इस नजरिया से आप सहमत भी हो सकते हैं, असहमत भी हो सकते हैं, लेकिन अमर्त्य सेन को मैं देखता हूं कि फिर से दुनिया के पूरब के हिस्से की एक बौद्धिक सत्ता, जिन्होंने पूरे दुनिया को ये बात मानने के लिए मजबूर किया, तो जो पूरब की बौद्धिक सत्ता है अमर्त्य सेन के रूप में वो हमारे बीच में पधारे हुए हैं। तो मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि पूरब की बौद्धिक सत्ता फिर से दुनिया पर स्थापित होगी और नालंदा विश्वविद्यालय के लिए जो कुछ भी ये कर रहे हैं वह एक स्थायी केंद्र के रूप में विकसित होगा। जब पहला विश्वविद्यालय दुनिया का नालंदा था, तो फिर इनके कुशल मार्गदर्शन में एक वैसा ही विश्वविद्यालय स्थापित होगा जो सब दिन अमर्त्य सेन जैसे बुद्धिजीवियों को और विद्वानों को पैदा करता रहेगा। हम तो उसके लिए इनके इस आगमन से और ज्यादा उत्साहित हैं और हम सीधे उनको सुनना चाहेंगे, उनकी बात को सुनना चाहेंगे। इन्हीं शब्दों के साथ आपने इतनी देर मुझको भी झेल लिया, इसके लिए मैं आपको धन्यवाद देता हूं।
Honorable Chief Minister Nitish Kumar ji, Honorable Deputy Chief Minister Sushil Modi ji, Dr. Shoibal Gupta, who has got me here, Shri Naveen Kumar ji, a colleague with whom we have been working, and Dr. Prof. Ghosh. It's a great privilege to be here today and be entrusted with the task of presenting Professor Amartya Sen It's a daunting task, and it will certainly please switch off mobiles. On my part, to even attempt a précis of what his work entails. In any case, since his Nobel Prize in 1998, his work has been commented upon in many places, and we must be all familiar with some aspects of his contributions. In the circumstances, let me try briefly to introduce you to the kind of scholar that we have with us today. First of all, the Nobel Committee recognized Sen's contribution to the area of welfare economics. Rather than merely describing what is, Amartya Sen told us what should be and why they ought to be so. Among the rarefied world of Nobel winners, as far as I can recall, there were only two others who were picked for their contribution to welfare theory. But each there had a second string to their bow. Their joint citation read for contributions to general equilibrium and welfare theory. I'm referring to John Hicks and Kenneth Arrow, who were awarded the Nobel jointly in 1972. Thus, even among Nobel winners, Sen occupies a special place. To reveal why Sen occupies such a unique position, let me travel back in time to 1975. The scene was the World Congress of the Econometric Society at Toronto, Canada. Professor Sen was presenting a paper on social choice theory, and I was hurrying to the venue to grab a seat. On the way, I encountered Lionel W. Mackenzie, one of the foremost theorists of the time, hurrying in the same direction. I'd been a student, and he'd asked whether I was heading for the Sen talk. And on my answering in the affirmative, in his characteristic way, he said, "Great, let's go grab a seat." On the way, we met Gerard Debreu, also heading the same way, and we all, I remember, walked in together to take our seats. Here were two of the foremost scholars in fields which were different from that of Sen, hurrying to grab a seat. In no time at all, the room was overflowing, and there was not even standing room. Debreu and Mackenzie could have gone to other sessions which were being run simultaneously. But in choosing Sen over their own areas, they were exhibiting the great interest and respect that Professor Sen always generated amongst leaders of the profession. Debreu, incidentally, was awarded the Nobel in 1983. They were all great economists, great names in other areas, but drawn to Sen's work. Already by 1975, Amartya Sen had widened the agenda of economic theory and all the social sciences without most of us realizing or even noticing it. Around 1977-78, the Sunday Observer in London carried a listing of some people from various walks of life in Britain who were most likely to make their mark. Amongst economists, the name of Amartya Sen figured. I did mention it to Professor Sen the next day. I said, locals seem to think that you are yet to make your mark. He had this great hearty laugh, and he said that the schoolboy who delivered their newspaper had seen his picture and rang the bell and inquired somewhat breathlessly whether he knew that he was in the papers and that he must be very famous. In 1994, Amartya Sen, an Indian citizen, was elected the president of the American Economic Association. This, to my mind, was really a very remarkable achievement. Indeed, so remarkable that another Nobel winner, Robert Solow, supported Sen with the now justly famous comment that Sen was the conscience of the profession. He went on to say about Sen, and I quote, "He taps something many economists feel, namely that you have spent your misspent youth learning all this stuff, but you cannot say as an economist whether something is the right thing to do." Another Nobel winner, Kenneth Arrow, at the same time, said that there is a tradition in economics of assuming that a dollar is a dollar. If the GDP goes up, that's all that matters. Amartya has always pushed against that. In 1995, the World Congress of the Econometric Society was meeting in Tokyo. And now Sen was delivering one of the distinguished lectures. If I recall correctly, his talk was titled on maximization and the act of choice. Once again, a packed house. I found myself sitting next to a rather intimidating person. The lecture was, as expected, brilliant one. My neighbor turned around, ecstatic in praise, and looking for support around him. I noticed the tag on his shirt pocket read David Krebs. He was an eminent game theorist. He was also the chairman of the program committee that year and said that he had chosen the speaker well. I couldn't resist querying, were you surprised? For more than 3 decades, Sen has been at the forefront of research in economic theory. His work impressed and earned the respect of not only his contemporaries, but also those who came to the scene much later. The world of economic theory, as the friend once described it, it is the big league. For few venture there, and those that do disappear quietly. To be there at the forefront for such a long period is really amazing. This has been possible, I think, for a compelling reason. The diverse areas in which Sen has simultaneously engaged during these decades. His contributions on inequality, deprivation, famines, and poverty, and on the meaning of justice brought theoreticians and field workers together and created a shared space for social sciences, and indeed that for philosophy too. At Harvard, he was professor of economics and philosophy. All of Amartya Sen's concerns, including his original theoretical concerns, came from his urge to test and try the humanities' social conscience. Gradually, we have begun to see what his work has done to all these diverse areas. He has been everything that we may have wanted to be. His repartees and responses were famous for their wit and aptness. I could have shared many such stories that one heard about Professor Sen, but we are running out of time. So let me just quickly end by saying that he was one of the earliest who warned us about the pitfalls of the market economy. And I quote from Sen, "I find it quite amazing that so many advocates of the glory of capitalism refuse to see the moral quality of good business behavior that has been so important in contributing to the success of capitalism. It is no less a moral success than a triumph of unconstrained greed." And his continued exhortation to fellow economists to undertake scrutiny of the standard preconceptions fell on deaf ears. He has argued for many years now that individual rights and capabilities are important and deserve greater attention than material well-being, and that economists and governments should focus on inequality as well as economic growth. It is said that Professor Sen's teacher, Joan Robinson, once admonished Amartya Sen to forget about the ethics rubbish and concentrate on economic development. I don't know whether this is true, but this I have read. If this indeed is true, we should be thankful that Sen paid scant attention. I have taken too much of your time and kept you from the main fare. Please welcome BHARATRATNA Amartya Sen.
It's a great privilege for me to be here in your company and in the company of my colleagues on the going through the individual names, obviously I'm very impressed that the Chief Minister who has been hosting us, and I had the privilege of being with him. And I also thank everyone here who has invited me, joined me here, and I'm really very grateful. And of course, I have to thank Professor Anjan Mukherjee for his extraordinarily kind remarks. He is an old friend. I should let you on to a secret, so that you shouldn't trust everything he says. On the other hand, he is extraordinarily kind. Let me confirm that the story about John Robinson is in fact true. And I think there is also a more elaborate aspect to it. He was very concerned that premature thinking about welfare might take one away from economic development so much that it would harm things. And she was, I think an analogy she used to often employ is that you shouldn't try to taste the fruits of a tree without first growing the tree. So there was a kind of sequential thing. You first become rich and then you become well. Now I think there's a real problem with that, because being well is particularly important when you're poor. And I think that Joan Robinson was a big influence in my life. I didn't agree with her on many subjects, but always extraordinarily enjoyed debating with her, discussing with her, and I miss the fact that she isn't here now for us to continue some of the arguments that's coming up. Now, I think we have to stop at some stage, because could we, do you think, can I stay stationary for 15 seconds and then you go away? All right. Thank you very much. I think we are going to declare 15 seconds to be up now. Thank you. Okay. Now I'm also very privileged to not only be in Bihar, but to be involved in a project, namely the re-establishment of the oldest university in the world, namely Nalanda, in roughly where it was, in a part of the state, and try to produce a university which could be worthy of the institution, which would, the name of which we will carry, namely Nalanda. I think it's quite important to recognize, since I'm talking on behalf past, present, and future, that there are two different ways of thinking about Bihar. One is to see Bihar on its own, its achievements, its creativity, its contribution, and the lives that people lead here, which ultimately perhaps is the most important thing. But there's another way of looking at Bihar, namely what it does for the world. It not only is a part of the world, part of India, part of Asia, part of the world, but it also has a unique presence in the world. I mean, one of the things to recognize, and I'm not going to spend any time on it, is that it is from this state Bihar, that the unity of India was first established. It is under the Mauryas that the entire country came under a uniform law and order situation which didn't exist earlier. It's a tremendous tribute to the leadership based in this city, Pataliputra, that their vision of what they should try to put together involved the whole of India. And it's one of the peculiar things that the British colonial administration often claimed, that they have somehow created India. India used to be little bits of countries, and they put that together. And I don't know how that thought came to the later British administration. It hadn't occurred to the early ones. I don't think any of the early ones, like Warren Hastings, ever thought of it that way. They knew what they were dealing with, maybe a country called India. Indeed, there was a company called East India Company, and we recognized the existence of that country. But that existence would be difficult to think of in the pre-Maurya and particularly pre-Nanda period. That again is the Bihar-based government. And that, you could see that the immediate pre-mass of that, when the greatest conqueror of the world, namely Alexander, was spending more than a year in Punjab after having defeated and conquered Persia. There was this question in his mind whether to take on Pataliputra. That was the basic thing. The Nandas were in office. And his soldiers were unwilling to do that. They have heard of the great glory of the Nanda Empire, its strength. And ultimately Alexander accepted that that's not going to happen. So he spent about a year in Punjab having local skirmishes, all of which he won, and also having conversations with a number of local philosophers, religious and social. In my new book, The Idea of Justice, which will be published in July in Britain and in India in August by Penguin, I go into some of these conversations because some of them are quite relevant to contemporary issues today. So that was the situation. There was not at that moment of Alexander, there are these Punjab kingdoms, including Puru's kingdom, Porus, as the Greeks used to call him, and there are other kingdoms elsewhere, and there is the emerging imperial power, namely the Nandas. And the immediate successor, of course, was the Maurya kingdom, which Alexander, in a sense, contributed to by creating a situation in which Chandragupta Maurya could seize the control of the state and then proceed to make it all India. It's also quite remarkable that it's this commitment to combining within the empire, the whole of India, that led to that defining moment in Ashoka's life, namely the conquest of Orissa, Kalinga, which made him revolt against the violence and brutality of war, turn to Buddhism, change his way of life, and change the governance of the country. So, there is a kind of remarkable aspect to it. Nalanda itself is totally remarkable. There was no other university like that. It's not often recognized that one of the proudest nations in the world, namely China, the only educational establishment in which any ancient Chinese has been ever educated outside China was in Bihar, namely Nalanda. There's absolutely no other institution to which the Chinese intellectuals went for training and education. So that too is a part of the history of Bihar, situated in a world context. What I'm going to concentrate on, however, is the more narrow question, having referred to the fact that the narrow question is narrow and there is a wider question to be engaged in, and which should be in the minds of people in Bihar, because Bihar is not just for Biharis, it's also for the world, for Indians, for Asians, and for the world. Now, I thought what I would do is to talk about some of the early achievements of Bihar and see what the relevance of it is to the present and to the future. Now, the first item, I think all of you might have had some piece of paper. I don't expect you to have digested it all. And there's not going to be any examination as you leave this hall on this subject, so I think you could relax. The first item you see there is development of education. And that, of course, at that time, and I'm talking now going back again to the same period well, beginning with the Mauryas really, and then proceeding further into the period of Nalanda. Nalanda came up in the 5th century and was destroyed in the 12th. it flourished in the period in between. In that entire period, very long stretch from about the 4th century BC to the 12th, there's a kind of dominance of the educational establishment in this part of the world, in Bihar. There is, of course, Nalanda itself, the oldest university, a Buddhist institution, but not just Buddhist. For one thing, some of the patrons were not Buddhist, but Hindu kings. But it was also not Buddhist in the sense that the curriculum was not confined to Buddhism or to religion. They did medicine, state-of-the-art medicine. They did public health care. The Chinese were particularly interested. One of the students, Yi Jin, who was here in the 7th century, devotes 2 chapters of his book on medicine and public health care in India, using what he had learned at Nalanda. So the educational aspect at the higher level was great. To mention perhaps even another remarkable, maybe even at a higher level still, the real departure in mathematics that happened in India, of course, came from the pioneering work of Aryabhat, and he was very early, 5th century, at about the same time when Nalanda being established. Quite a confluence of things. Aryabhat was here in Kusumpur. He was born he was a mathematician from Kerala, but moved to Patna because this is where the other mathematicians were, and Anjal, who is I could give a talk on Anjal's work too, but I'm not threatening to give one now. But he's a very distinguished mathematical economist. But as Anjal was recognized and others were too, generally, that mathematicians seek each other's company, and Aryabhat wanted to be somewhere where other mathematicians were there, and that was true in one part of Patna at that time, so he moved there. So there was this major work going on, and its impact across the world was quite remarkable. Let me explain how profound this impact is when we look at some of the major mathematical concepts today, which were evolved in Patna, but which is part of our understanding of mathematics in the world without our being quite aware what the origin of it is. And one of them is actually a story I do mention in my book, Argumentative Indian, but I'll take the opportunity of recollecting it because it's particularly apt in the context of Patna, is the trigonometric term with which nearly all of us must be familiar, called sine, S-I-N-E, sine, cosine, tan, and so on. And why is it called sine? Actually, the person who invented the concept was Aryabhat, somewhere in this city, and he called it Jia, meaning chord. In fact, he called it chord half. So half of it, namely the radius. And if you remember your school geometry, you could quite easily understand why sine could be called half chord. But Aryabhat, who was quite a believer in brevity, he, instead of calling it Jia Artha all the time, soon shortened it, and his later writings he's calling, well, later in the same book, he's referring it to as Jia, just Jia. Now this had a profound, Aryabhat's work, including that of Brahmagupta, Varahamihira, and others, had a profound impact on the Arabs and through the Arabs from Europe. When the Arabs translated Aryabhat's work, they transcribed Jia to the very close word Jiba. Now, Jiba is a completely meaningless word in Arabic. But you might remember, if you have taken an interest in it, that Arabic and Hebrew don't have any vowel signs. It's only a consonant. So it shows only JB, I mean the same way as Akbar and Kabir are the same name, it's KBR. And if you can call it Akbar, you can call it Kabir, written in the same way. And so they wrote JB. Now there is a good word in Arabic called Jabe, which means a bay or a cove. So the later generation of Arabs, instead of calling it Jiba, derived from GR, they're calling it Jabe. And you can see that from poetry, that is rhyming with Jabe. Now, in 1150, when the concept eventually reached Europe, Gerardo Cremona translated the Arabic work, which was translation of the Sanskrit work, done here. And Jabe, as a lake or a cove, was translated into the Latin word for a lake or a cove, which is sinus. And from that word sinus, the modern term sine is derived. So there is a long history beginning in Patna, proceeding via the Middle East on to Cremona in Italy, and then across the world. And then, of course, sine comes back to us again as part of modern trigonometry that we are looking. And when it's taught in Patna again, it has done its full circle, gone around the world and come back here. So there was a kind of major educational achievement in this period. But if it applies to the higher level, it applies to a basic level too. I think the connection with Buddhism, which is very strong in Bihar, in DC, even the name Bihar, reminds us of that connection of the Bihar. Had always emphasized basic education. Because after all, Buddha was very keen that the scriptures should be accessible to people. People should be able to read it. He thought Sanskrit was already a decadent language. He much preferred colloquial language, Prakrit or Pali, and which is also how the Buddhist scriptures got transcribed. It's only later when the Mahayana classical tradition becomes strong, both in India and in China, with people like Nagarjuna and Kumarjiva in China, that it comes back again to full Sanskrit, because they're classical scholars, no nonsense about Prakrit or Pali for them. But the basic focus on elementary education for all is a very strong Buddhist focus emerged here. So while it did Nalanda and the maths of the Aryabhatta, it also did school education in a massive way, and there's a lot of discussion of that in the Buddhist literature. So let me leave that question here, and the development of education is one of the early achievements here. Another achievement, of course, is advancement of public health care. Now that was part of the discussion even in early thoughts here, namely connected with the writings of, or the inscriptions of Ashoka. But the vivid description of hospitals that we get in Pataliputra really comes much later. That comes from Fahian, or Paxian, as they are now sometimes called, or Paxian. There are different ways of pronouncing this name. In early 5th century Pataliputra. And I take it what I saw this morning at the Komaha is in fact the same hospital that Bhatia described about being available, public health care available to charity, people coming and seeking care, getting it free of cost, and then dismissing themselves at the end of the treatment when it's over. So advancement of public health care is another one of them. Now there is also a third point which I call government by discussion. That's a phrase that is often attributed to John Stuart Mill. In fact, it pre-existed Mill as it happened, but I won't go into that history. Government by discussion is that government and democracy is not just about voting. It's really about discussion and arriving at conclusions on the basis of agreement. Voting is a part of that. Conversation is very central to it. Now, this was also one of the early Buddhist commitments. And the first of the global council, whereby disputes were to be discussed, assessed, examined and re-examined, and decided on. All of them occurred in this state. The first Buddhist council was in Bihar, shortly after Buddha's death. The second one was in Vaishali, a century later, and the third and the largest was in Pataliputra, hosted by Ashoka in the 3rd century BC. Including public policy making as to what are the priorities of state action. And these remain as, I think, great landmarks of the history of democracy. And if they are not recognized in the standard view of the history of democracy, which sees only the role of Athens, which is of course very great, but doesn't see the role of the public discussion, which initiated in this state a long time ago. I think they miss out something in the nature of democracy. The fourth item I mentioned is the rule of law and governance in the interest of people. Now that, of course, was the subject matter of the great treatise on political economy, Arthashastra by Kautilya. Again, the writing of which and the ideas behind which is based on the intellectual milieu that was occurring here. It's a more real product. The version of Arthashastra that we have now is a later version, but the original version was a product of this city, and it had an approach which was very different from what Chandragupta's grandson, namely Ashoka, would present. And there is an interesting contrast between them. Kautilya was very much like a modern economist who believed that people don't respond to anything other than personal incentives of gain. Ashoka thought that to be absolute nonsense. So there are two different approaches. There's a very interesting book written by a man called Bruce Rich, which I recommend. I actually have recommended in the past since I did write the foreword to the book. It's called To Uphold the World, the Kautilya and Ashoka's view of governance. They come to the conclusion that Ashoka's was much grander, much more impressive than obviously, because there was a lot of moral incentives there. On the other hand, it was successful in his time, and then it disintegrated after Ashoka. Partly the success in Ashoka's period was because Ashoka had not fully disestablished the Kautilyan system of incentives, punishment, sometimes heavy punishment. And he had reduced the heaviness of the punishment, but not really dispensed with the incentive structure. There is a really interesting issue to be studied there. I'm not going to spend any time on it, but notice what we are looking at here are two views about how people should be governed. There isn't a disagreement that everyone should be governed the same, rule of law. Governed the same doesn't mean that they will be treated equally, because Kautilya was a great believer in caste, which Ashoka was not, so that the caste entitlements were much greater for the upper caste in Kautilya, but not so at all in Ashoka. Ashoka was totally inclusive, and it's not often recognized that even though Aristotle and others are given the credit for having had the early democratic theorizing thought, the fact is that Aristotle didn't include women, did not include slaves, and in the theorization that you see, the inscriptions of Ashoka, there's no exception. Women are included like men, and the distinction between free men and slaves is not there. Indeed, Ashoka himself, as probably is well known here, actually went on freeing the slaves as part of his role as a monarch to abolish slavery. That was probably the first attempt to abolish slavery in the world. Now, moving on, the fifth item put down is the building of physical infrastructure. Now here we come to a different period, and I think the person who stands out most in the history of the world in this respect is Shah in early 16th century, who is actually based again here. It's from Bihar that the Shah's empire was run. Shah had defeated Humayun, he had established himself as the emperor of India. But for the successful victory of Akbar, that empire, based again here, like the Mauryas and the Guptas, might well have been continued. I mean, Pataliputra could have, not Pataliputra, but Bihar could have been the center of running India. But of course, the Mughal victory changed that and moved the power base to Delhi and Agra. But Shah did more to construct roads, to construct bridges, in a way that is truly memorable. And I think this is part of Bihar's history, which we have to remember, because it's a huge tradition. And I remember as a child, when I was in Shantiniketan, we had a huge flood in the Damodar River. And every bridge in sight constructed in the 19th century and early 20th century was destroyed. The only one surviving was a bridge made by Shah many years ago, many centuries ago. And so it's a tribute to the skill as well as the vision of the physical infrastructure. And that's a part of the state. Sometimes, even in the context of Nalanda, I've come across the description, and I think it was very unfortunate when it happened, that you describe it as a great achievement, primarily of Buddhist, of course, but whatever it is, pre-Muslim, and then you destroy that patriarchy. And then there's a tendency to think of 800 years of dark ages descending. But that's not what happened. What happened, of course, there was destruction and violence, no question. That Nalanda saw a sad end because of the destructiveness of the initial conquest. But things moved on, and there was an interaction between the Hindus and the Muslims, along with others like Jains, and there was an integration. And the integrated product, and Shah itself, of course, comes from outside. On the other hand, the integrated product reflects thinking, which are that of a very urban-based thinking. We can't think of anything more urban-based than people who have been running imperial power for a long time, like the Mauryas. You have to build the roads, you have to build the bridges. And this is an integrated thought, and that is part of a proud history of this country, not just a history of Hindu people, but also of Muslims. Finally, resistance to inequality and exclusion. Now here's a point to make which people don't often recognize, that in the context of India, of course, Buddhism is, I think, the first pervasive protest against caste-based hierarchy. Anti-caste arguments exist everywhere, including in parts of Upanishads. And it certainly exists in the writings of the of the atheists and the materialists of that time, already who were very prominent, the Lokayata and Charvaka, which would take form of a very well-developed philosophy later. But at that time already it exists, and you can see from Buddha's own argument that he is taking his argument with the atheists at least as seriously as his argument with what is called established religion, which later came to be called as Hinduism. And of course the atheists did not believe in the caste system either. But the first organized all over the country anti-caste position is taken by Buddhism, and which is not surprisingly why that is often referred to when Ambedkar, for example, converted to Buddhism. It was a recognition that Buddhism had something to say about untouchability, which needed to be asserted. That's the idea behind it. Now that movement, of course, began and flourished with the help of people of the state. It's people like Bihar and others. You can still see when you go to Rati where he's supposed to have got off the chariot and walked up to see Buddha. And it's that which made that caste, anti-caste, anti-caste movement possible. Similarly, the exclusion of women is again something which is resisted by Buddhism. Buddhism's attitude is quite interesting from a theocratic point of view, theological point of view. Buddha was opposed to the ordaining of women, a subject on which he argues with Ananda, who was not finding it easy to accept it. Why not? Why not? He keeps asking. Buddha did not want it. On the other hand, in terms of giving role to women, other than being priests, there is a tremendous expansion in Buddhist thought, inclusiveness about women's very important social role. That's already recognized. This debate still continues, still in whether it be in Anglican Church or in not only Catholicism, where there is no question yet, but there might be one day. It's still a debate in the Anglican Church and the Church of England as to whether women can be priests or not. And that's a debate that is exactly the debate taking place in the state of Bihar between Ananda and Buddha in the 6th century BC. That is still a part of the rhetoric of resistance to inequality, part of the determination and articulation of the egalitarian tradition. And this has again had again and again, including rebellion of various types against traditional hierarchy, many of which have emerged in this day. Certainly, even though the Sepoy Mutiny began in Barakpur, in Calcutta, the fact is that a lot of the fighting and a lot of the real rebellion against colonial things was concentrated on Bihar. And of course, Bihar paid a very heavy price too after the mutiny was squashed in terms of its effect. Bengal got off very lightly, but basically Bengalis were not in rebellion against the British rule. And in fact, in the regime that emerged, there was a kind of change of the reliance of personality. Quite a lot of the people in the former regime, even the regime of Siraj-Dowla, were actually, as the names indicate, not Bengalis, came from the West, some of them from Bihar, some of them from elsewhere. But in the British rule came increasingly to rely on Bengali administrators, Bengali teachers, Bengali doctors, and so on. There is an interesting history to be written. And again, Bihar paid a big price here in being rebellious. The price takes the form. I mean, if there were a lot of educationists and doctors coming into Bihar from Bengal, that's partly because many more medical institutions have been established by the British in Bengal compared with that in Bihar. So it's a rebellious position which Bihar took and actually did pay a price for. Now, I must not take too much time on this because I have to now turn as to what's the position now. I think one of the striking things is that the reason for which Bihar is often seen as being a relatively backward state today are exactly the areas in which it has flourished most. It's pointed out that it has a higher level of illiteracy than other states. Most other states, some measures indicate it has the highest level. The absence of medical care is often pointed out. The sharp economic and social inequality is a factor. The low development of infrastructure is another factor. High incidence of social disorder has been a factor, so I understand that that is the situation in which the fate has been turned. So what you're dealing with here, and that is quite remarkable, that on one side you are looking at disadvantages and problems, not just traumatic problems, but problems going on for decades and developing over the last century, are exactly in those areas in which Bihar was actually a pioneer, indeed the pioneer, in many of these areas. There is a peculiar irony in that in areas which Bihar pioneered, it actually stands way behind in many of these areas. Now, if that is the diagnosis of the present, it's easy to see how we might think about the future. Because Bihar's prosperity and Bihar's success was based on precisely the opposite of what we are seeing now as British has left the country and as the years of post-independence India, 60 years, produced a kind of dissimilar development in different parts of the country. And I think nothing is as important now as to try to undo these disadvantages. And there is something to learn from not only from the ideas and the pointers to what is to be done in the ancient thought of the warriors of Buddha and Buddhist and medieval thought of Shesha, but also deciding to do them. And here I turn to the fact that what was done by the remarkable figures that I refer to, based on this date, like Chandragupta or Ashoka, when you think about it, there were extraordinary challenges. Chandragupta is trying to establish the first all-India empire. Hasn't been done before. He hasn't got an army yet. He has some stories of illegitimacy of his birth. He's not a high-born person who's is born in nobility, but given the illegitimacy issue, he's not a natural leader by position of birth. He has to establish it by skill, by taking on other people, getting their help, establishing his empire, and doing what he has to do exceedingly well, namely win victory after victory after victory until the all-India empire is established. Similarly, when Ashoka, at the end of the Kalinga War, decides to change things, not only become Buddhist himself, but try to disband the army, try to establish good governance through cooperation, public discussion, tries to have educational and medical establishments rather than training for the army and the military, and frees the slaves, establishes what we now would call human rights in terms of everyone having an entitlement by virtue of humanity, independently, and very important in Ashoka's thought, irrespective of what religion you belong to. what caste you belong to, what group you come from. You have this right as a human being. That is one of the major aspects of the inscription, clearest in the inscription in Ergodi, but it's present in the others too. So that's it. What I mean, when you think about it, someone trying to do that, this would look like an absolutely impossible task to take off. And yet he did. And he succeeded. Now there are histories to be written as to why his successors did not. And you know, if I were to give a course of lectures, I might offer some views on that. But I think the thing to learn from it is to do it. And this applies to all of them, including all the way to Shah. I mean, here is, what is the moment to think about an infrastructure? When you have a settled empire. But that's not Shah's position. He has just defeated some early Moguls, established a bit of an empire. He knows that the Moguls are not dead, that they will come back, and they did. That is not a great moment to build bridges and roads. That is, you might think, is a peacetime activity. And yet that's exactly what he's doing. Because he wants to combine winning as well as running a country which is well run. I think what we see here is an enormous victory of determination and confidence. And this is extremely important. This question often comes up when I wrote my book, Argumentative India. I'm a modernist in many ways. I believe that our past does not restrain us in any way. But I also think that there's a lot to be learned from the past, including being inspired by it, including by being stimulated by it, and including learning a thing or two about how things are done. And when I was criticized, and one of them was a very civilized critique, a very fine critique by Ramchandra Gupta, he said that why does he think that just because it's happened in the past that it has any claim to our attention? I think it has a claim to our attention. Because that's the way we think about human life. That is, when we think about our life, we leave it short period, go away. Some people have elaborate theories as to where you go. I don't have many elaborate theories on that. But it's a fleeting moment. And the present is a very fleeting moment. The present passes even as I speak. It becomes past. So if we are completely unrelated to our past, it would be very difficult to think what things inspire us. Psychology is immensely important. I'm not speaking as an economist, and everywhere I'm being stopped and people say, what do I think about the recession? I've not said anything, but let me say one thing. That among many, I have a paper coming out in the New York Review, just correcting the proof topic, so it'll come out in the next number, which will be out next week. And the week after, the same article in shorter version, the Financial Times is carrying. So my viewers will know. But let me say now that among other things, it's a huge crisis of confidence and psychology. I mean, and you cannot pull things through with the stimulation packages only until you can change the way people think about these issues. And what's happening is that you can add a lot of liquidity and give them to the banks where the banks won't lend it to it. By the way, the right person to read for any of you who are economists from this is not Keynes, because John Maynard Keynes didn't really have much sophisticated psychological issues. The person to read is Keynes' contemporary called Arthur Cecil Pigou, A.C. Pigou. He had a huge discussion about how psychology grips us and why when you're in a depth of depression, you may not be able to pull yourself up just by doing the right thing. You have to recreate the psychology. Among the recreation of psychology is the confidence that things will work, can be done. And I think if I've always been asked, I was asked yesterday when I was giving an interview at the Chief Minister's residence, what do I think about the Chief Minister's achievement? And I said, I cannot really comment on this, because even though I admire him, because I am not an expert on that. I could tell him that his achievement in helping us with Nalanda have been very great. That's the context in which we have worked. And I know how determined he is when he wants to do something. And indeed, I think this proposal came from him originally. And then from Bihar to Singapore to Japan to Delhi, then came back again here. And it's coming here. And I think if all the things I heard, including what Sri Babu said, is correct, that part of this must be a confidence, a determination to do things. That these are problems. We know what the problems are. These are problems that have not plagued Bihar forever. Indeed, in the primitive worlds in the past, Bihar was a leader rather than being backward in that respect. And things could be changed. And it's that determination that's needed. And I think, and I hope very much, and it's not just a statement about the chief minister, but about the people of Bihar generally, that I think the need to be confident in and secure in knowing that things can be changed and can be changed dramatically is extraordinarily important. And in that, a very important part has to be played by the fact that historically it was very different in Bihar, a long stage, and exceptionally different, because all the areas I mentioned, like development of education, public health care, government-wide discussion, rule of law across the country, building of physical infrastructure, all these aspects, Bihar was a pioneer in the world. And the resistance to inequality, which has to be present in every society, pretty much all societies are unequal, and that is never a consideration we can forget. And there again, Bihar has a huge role in the past. So it's that inspiration from the past that informs us why the deprivations of the present are transitory, and also informs us for the future as to why a transitory deprivation can be overcome if we are determined to overcome it and do it with the spirit and confidence that the state has produced again and again in the past, and I don't doubt will produce again in the future. Thank you.
चक्रवर्ती भैया चक्रवर्ती बीमारती अरे कौन झूठ बोल रहा है
Friends,
आपका भाई
what a lecture it was. I never, of course I was expecting it, but it was better than my expectation. Friends, we'll have now a question, comments session, none too long, very brief. But instead of coming here to make your questions or comments, please put them in a paper. My colleague, Deepak Kumar, will be distributing papers. You can note that and give it to the chairperson, Professor Anjan Mukherjee. And then we will call one by one as long as it is possible. Thank you.
Friends, you have just listened to the eloquent talk of Professor Sen, and I'm sure you may be having observations and questions. Let me start our discussion by raising the issue of development. Ours is a poor state. In the absence of developed infrastructure, private investment is difficult to come by. In the circumstances, public investment is the primary resource for development. Bihar today is one of the largest spenders on development. The Reserve Bank of India brings out an annual report on state finances. While I was going through the report, I saw a bar chart showing the development expenditure of different states. And they had arranged the states in the order of the magnitude of expenditure. And I was very happy to find that Bihar's bar appeared right at the left, the tallest bar amongst all states in the country, which made me feel very proud. The report also brought out that not only we were the largest spenders on development, but also that the growth of spending on development was also very significant. But when I turned a few pages of the report, I found another bar chart which showed the Human Development Index of different states, again arranged in order of the magnitude of the index. And I was very sorry to find that our state appeared right at the right end, showing the smallest Human Development Index. So this is a contradiction. But in the context of scarcity of resources, we would like to request Professor Sen to advise us where we should put our scarce resources to bring the best result in terms of development. We would be very happy for the guidance and advice of Professor Sen on this issue.
I have to confess that I actually had a hand in constructing it in the presence of Bihar now, namely the development of educational facilities, medical care, and economic development connected with also infrastructure. Now, I think in all these respects, my answer is not any different from what I said in the lecture, namely you have to change it. There's no magic solution to the Human Development Index. And as the author of the ATI, let me say I'm delighted that it's not manipulable like that. That you have to do the really hard work. You have to raise the life expectancy before the HDI will notice. You have to raise the level of literacy before we notice that. So I think the answer is exactly what I would argue, that you have to change that. Now, by spending more money on development, you could actually contribute to it. So your second bar chart has to be addressed to the first bar chart, which is favorable in this case, and they have a good record on that, and could continue to do so. But it's not just a question of spending the money. There was a question of the government. And one of the things that the President has found in many of our studies is that in addition to the, maybe in the context of West Bengal and to some extent Jharkhand, that aside from the problem of lack of funding in some of these development efforts, lack of organization is a big problem too. For example, in the context of Bengal schools, the absentee is itself about more than 4/5 of all the teachers. But we have to work, so we have to do an organizational change too. So I think there are two things that are needed. First of which is connected with the bar chart, namely the expenditure on under these heads. The second is the organizational reform, and some of them require innovative thought, including working with the unions is a very big thing. The trouble with the union context in India is that there are some who actually hate the unions, who would like them to be destroyed if possible, and others who absolutely love the unions and who can't think that the unions do any wrong. What we need is a situation of a collaborative of work. The unions are a very important part of the institutional structure, and the question is how the unions could take an interest in the collaboration, not just to improve the lives of its own workers, but everybody else. The Primary Teachers Association should be concerned not just with the teacher's life, but also with the student's life and their education. And actually, the unions have responded very well. We have seen those states in which, those districts in which that collaboration has proceeded the Prateek Trust's latest finding already indicate a considerable extent of success in reducing both the absenteeism of the teachers, sometimes eliminating it altogether, and increasing the attendance corresponding of the students too. So I think it's a question of, again, having the confidence that we can do it, but along with the confidence, we also need the willingness to accept innovation. But of all the things with which I began that happened in this state, these were all innovative departures. Having global public councils pop up for discussion that took place in Rajgir and Vaishali and Pataliputra was completely new, they're innovative. The public medical care at no cost is an innovation. And so all these are things that have to be taken on as important, necessary innovation. But it can be done, but I still emphasize that the confidence that we can do it is very central to it.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. So it will be courteous to introduce myself first. I very briefly met you when you came for a lecture at the London School of Economics. The occasion was the retirement of Professor Meghnad Desai. And Professor Anthony Giddens, I distinctly remember, said, "Such intellectual firepower is rarely seen on this stage." Sir, I was a PhD student in the economics department at that time. I now work for the finance department in the state, which means my bosses are sitting next to you. But I'll still take this opportunity to ask you a practical question. I'm talking about, you very rightly said, there are issues which reflect in contemporary Bihar, which are exactly the opposite of past heritage. And this is what we need to undo. I'm talking about the story of undoing, the recreation of psychology, as you say. A typical description of Bihar's economy: 30% primary sector agriculture, only 15% secondary sector, only 5% industrial sector. Last 3 years, if you see any time series of Bihar's economic parameters, as it was mentioned, Bihar spends highly on development expenditure. In fact, development expenditure in the last 3 years has grown 33% plus. The per capita development expenditure has grown at such a pace that it is unthinkable anywhere else in this country. The per capita development expenditure in Bihar was a mere 30 to 35% of the national average 3 years ago. And in the next year's budget, it is going to go up to as much as 60% in per capita terms. But at the same time, the per capita incomes continue to be 1/3 of the national average. The private investment is very hard to come by. The option value is very high given the recent past. The question we want to ask you, or your thoughts on it, given this economic scenario, how long do you think accelerated development expenditure would result in accelerated growth and real higher per capita incomes. Thank you, sir.
From Mr. P.C. Chaudhary. If manpower and more so the working manpower of Bihar is a resource, then could this significantly pull Bihar on the path of development? If yes, how? Certain parts of the country, including Bihar, are witnessing a violence in the form of nationalism.
It's in a different verse.
Sorry?
You don't know who the author of that.
This one, I don't have the name. Witnessing violence in the form of nationalism, what economic measures or confidence building measures will be needed to change the situation? Then this is an easy one which I think you can answer immediately. Professor Sen, which book is coming in August? This is Mr. Rajneesh from Sahara TV. And what is in it? What is your inspiration to be a welfare economist? So, one question per slip, there are two questions. How can we do away with the caste system in a deep malaise in Bihar? No author of the question. Then we have something from Chiroshri Dasgupta. Why did the post-independence order fail to address disparity, regional?
Okay.
I thought maybe that's enough.
Okay,
I'll give you one. Private enterprise will come in Bihar when infrastructure develops. What about private sector coming in? If it helps you, I'll send you these slips. There are some more, but I don't think we can take all of them. So let me just see how it goes and let Professor Sen respond, and then I'll explain some more.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think Dr. Chola, thanks for reminding me when we met first. And I was pleased to tell you that the occasion that you referred to, namely Meghnad Desai retirement, is worth thinking about now, because of course he was with us in Bihar until last night, because he's a member of the Nalanda committee, and we were in Gaya, Radgir and Nalanda, and then Patna together. So we also had his input, and I mentioned that, since he's also very committed to the Nalanda project. I think the question about accelerated public expenditure, how long will it continue to make a difference? Well, I think it should continue to make a difference as long as there is a difference to be made. And that may be, unfortunately, quite a long time. So it is needed, but as I mentioned, it's not the only thing to look at. It's also the organization. It has to be gone on simultaneously. And that question relates to what I've already answered. But you're right, that's a very central thing to look at. I think Dr. P.C. Chaudhary said it's manpower and asset. Of course, it is an asset. But also our needs are connected with our manpower and the size of the population. So it comes from both sides. It's an asset on one side, and it's a determinant of our needs on the other. And the main thing is not to make a special thing about manpower being one or the other, just positive or just negative. To recognize that the whole exercise of economics is about human beings. So manpower is not an afterthought when everything else has been thought of. The whole of economics is about manpower. And so I think you're quite right to focus on manpower, but that is the nature of the subject of economics as well as the social science. And indeed every other human endeavor is really a manpower problem in some sense. it's quite interesting because there's a subject called manpower planning. And many years ago, like, I guess almost, when it was 50-something years ago, more than half a century ago, I gave a lecture once in Bangkok on manpower planning. Mainly because they wanted me to give it. It's not that I was an expert on it. And then for 40 years after that, I received invitations from Bangkok from every meeting on manpower planning. And we'll begin by saying, given your specialization, we particularly like you. And there's only one way of making sense of it, that since I'm interested in economics, I'm interested in manpower, because that's what the subject is about. On the question of Naxalism and violence, that's a very complicated subject. I think the idea of what economic development would solve it is not such an easy question to answer. Naxalism obviously draws on discontent and unhappiness connected with inequality and so on. So obviously economic development has a role there. But that's not the only thing. No political movement is just that. It has a dynamism of its own, and we have to view it in terms of what the movement might move towards. Now, for example, in Nepal, we know that Naxalite position has changed quite a bit recently. It's not that the economic development of Nepal today is very different from what it was 3 years ago. Just the politics in many ways have changed. So there is a political issue here, as well as an economic issue to be addressed. I think Rajneesh of Sahara TV, my next book is The Idea of Justice. Well, what is there? It's a book in philosophy, so that's what it is there. It's an approach to, it's a different approach to the theory of justice. I did not come as surprised to learn that it's my approach that I'm presenting there. And it does differ from the more standard theories of justice today, like laws that nobody can walk in and so on. But I can't give a summary of the book, I think, right now. You may have to wait till August for that. But at that time, I'd be very happy to chat with you on this. Regarding why did I get into welfare economics? Well, I think it's an interesting subject. It's concerned with humanity, and the term is to some extent slightly deceptive. Welfare economics includes not only what makes people better off, but also human freedom, which is not, strictly speaking, a matter of welfare. It also includes such things which there's a well-developed subject now called social choice theory, namely how can you determine on the basis of the individual preferences of people, how would you determine what the social preferences are? Now this has come to be called welfare economics because it emerged from there. But all these questions interest me, and I have just engaged in it. Happily, it's not the only thing I'm interested in it, but I am interested in it. But I'm glad that Anjum mentioned that my Nobel Prize was in economics. Usually I hear from people that I got it for something connected with development or connected with family. But it wasn't. It was really connected with economics as it happened. Caste system. Well, that of course is a major plague for the whole country and this state too. I don't think I can add very much more to what I said in the lecture, that it is something that has to be fought, both at the level of public policy as well as the level of public agitation, because each of these have a role in changing an iniquitous system. And I think if we had a lot more time, we could have talked a bit more about details of it. But I think we have to leave it as that it has to be addressed at different levels, because the caste system just destabilizes us, weakens us in hundreds of ways, and have done that to India for a very long time indeed. And nothing is as important as being able to conquer the evils of the caste system that exists today. Now I've reached that level of stupidity now that I can't read my writing. All the question that Mr. Dasgupta asked. Now I know the name, seriously Dasgupta. The question is, that doesn't allow me to interpret what his question must have been. I can't say, oh seriously, I know what he would have asked. Why did the post-independent order fail to address disparity, regional, social, economic, if the state-led development process could not do so and the present market? But first of all, the post-independent India did address some of the disparities. It didn't manage to address others. I don't think you don't expect that all the disparities would disappear immediately. I'm not about those who think nothing had happened in India. That's not the case. I think there's a difference that we see compared with others. Situation and change, and sometimes it comes in an odd way in the form of complaint. I once, about 15 years ago, I didn't miss a train, but the train didn't come. I was going to go to Calcutta to catch a plane. It didn't come because there was an unsafe bridge over Ajoy River. It didn't show up. So I took a cab, and he said he would get me at a certain time to Bardhaman, but he was getting slow, and his complaint was that there was a lot of bullock carts on the way. And he said, I can't tell you how terrible the world has become now, because earlier, whenever the bullock carts would see a taxi, they would immediately get off the road. And now they never do. So there are signs of progress that you do see in the world. I think the rest of them, but Chelsea question is serious, because the remaining ones we have to address with the urgency that they demand. Will the market system on its own be solving it? I don't think market system on its own has ever solved the problem. All the institutions tend to work together. Even the expansion of longevity, say in Europe and America, was not primarily connected with income rise. It was primarily connected with public health care, which expanded, and the income rise contributed. The income rise contributed by the market could be utilized by the state to create health care. And in some ways that is what Pasaliputta was trying to do, based on the cost for the state to run public health care. And there is a lesson that the market has a role. I don't take the view the market has no role. It can have a hugely important role in generating income. But you cannot rely on it. You have to do public expenditure, you have to do state-based institutions, you have to do public agitation, public discussion, grievances, problems about what are the issues we are facing. And I think the market economy will have a role here, but it's a limited role. And there would be a huge role to be played by the state and so forth. By the way, my article that I was referring to, it's not referred to India, primarily about the United States and it's about the world, but the US is the global crisis plays a part. And there I discussed how the neglect of the state sector has played a vicious part in both generating the crisis as well as making the crisis much more painful for those who suffer from it compared with what could have been if we did not have such blind faith in the market economy has become quite standard over the course of the last 3 or 4 decades. So I think there's a serious issue to be considered there. Now, private enterprise, what was the question? Is that a different question from the market economy? It's probably the same as the market economy, isn't it? Okay, then read the question. Yeah.
Your father, whenever visited Patna, used to spend a lot of time fishing in the game.
Is this a new question you're reading? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
And I happened to be his little companion and assistant because I lived in the ANC Street campus. Have you inherited this hobby?
Well, it's very easy to answer, have I inherited this hobby? The answer is no. I hate fishing with a passion. But I have great sympathy for the questioner because I think it's a very boring thing to do, to fish. But nothing is as boring as a companion to fishing. As a child, I've often gone with my father when he was a professor at Dhaka University, and we would go to one of those ponds, and you see to sit there, and nothing much happens. There's a little thing sticking out of the water, and the fisherman sits there for hours expecting movement out of it. And you sit next to him, seeing him expecting a movement out of that little thing. And in these high stakes of boredom in the world, if I try very hard, I may be able to think of one or two things which are even more boring than that. But right now I can't think of any, I have to say. But my father was a very interesting man, I ought to say. It's only if I could get him off fishing, then we could have a good conversation.
Well, now you can see Professor Sen at his best while responding to questions of this type. Thank you, Professor Sen. We have taxed you long enough. And my apologies to all the question writers whose questions could not be taken up. I now call upon Dr. Ghosh for his vote of thanks.
Dear this afternoon, Professor Sen, our dear Chief Minister, Sri Nitish Kumar ji, our dear Deputy Chief Minister, Sri Sushil Kumar ji, Professor Ranjan Mukherjee, Chairperson of this occasion, Sri Naveen Kumar ji, our Finance Commissioner and Chairperson of CEPTF at Agri, ladies and gentlemen. At the end of this memorable lecture, it's my proud privilege to propose a vote of thanks to all those who have made it possible. Obviously, I start with Professor Sen, who, through his speech, has drawn our attention not just to our glorious history, but what we ought to learn from it. Be it education, or public health, or government by discussion, or the responsible state, we have often been pioneers. We only need to be inspired by their past and recreate a psychology of confidence to take us forward. As some of you might know, Professor Sen had visited Patna several times during the 60s and early 70s. Thereafter, there has been a long gap, but because of his present association with the Nalanda International University, we hope to receive him more frequently and also listen to him. Sir, I, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Agni, and on behalf of people of Bihar, express our deep gratitude for your kind presence and the memorable lecture. May I now request Dr. Sunita Lala for Organization Agri to present Professor Sen with a memento which will help him remember all of us. Friends, our gathering this afternoon has also been blessed by our Honorable Chief Minister and the Deputy Chief Minister, both of whom command deep respect from all the citizens of Bihar. The turnaround in the process of governance that they have engineered is visible in many places, including the arena of academics. A number of intellectual exercises on the development of Bihar have indeed been initiated by them, and their presence and participation in those exercises has always been deep. It's therefore no surprise for us that cutting into their busy schedules, they have chosen to be with us this afternoon. We are extremely grateful to both Sri Nitish Kumar ji and Sri Sushil Kumar Modi ji for boosting our model through their gracious presence on this occasion. Friends, next I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Anil Mukherjee of the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, for kindly presiding over this function. Professor Mukherjee is extremely widely known for some of his fundamental contributions to economic theory, and he could not have a better chairperson than he to preside over this function. We are all thankful to him, not merely for presiding over this meeting, but also for providing valuable guidance for the Center of Economic Policy and Public Finance at ALTRI. Friends, we also have amongst us this afternoon Sri Naveen Kumar, Principal Secretary, Department of Finance, Government of Bihar. Right from the day Professor Sen's program was confirmed, he has been taking deep interest to ensure its success. Please remember, this is the month of February, and the busiest month for all finance functionaries, including obviously Finance Secretary. That Sri Kumar is with us this afternoon only shows how kind he is to ALTRI and how keen he is to promote Center for Economic Policy and Public Finance, hosted by ALTRI, of whom he is the chairperson. We are all grateful to him. Finally, I would like to thank members of the media and you all distinguished guests for making this afternoon a memorable one. Thank you, all of you again.
अच्छा